I'm Mark, 38 years old, and 3 years ago I found a sticky note with my wife's AOL password. I logged in and watched our life unravel in black and white text. I didn't break down. I didn't explode. I closed the laptop and started making a plan, slow, surgical, and unavoidable. If you want to see how I turned that quiet betrayal into payback, hit like and subscribe and stay tuned. This isn't a story about shouting. It's one about consequences. You ever look back on a time in your life and realize you were living inside a photograph? That's what the early 2000s feel like to me, a frozen picture that smells faintly of pancake syrup and crayons. Saturday mornings meant cartoons humming in the background while the kids played with plastic dinosaurs on the living room rug. Our daughter Emma would insist on wearing her sparkly princess dress even when we were just making breakfast, and our son Caleb thought every day was a race to see who could eat more chocolate chips straight out of the bag. We had a small 2-story house with fading blue siding, a patchy backyard where the grass never quite grew evenly, and a minivan that rattled whenever you turned left. But it was ours. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, the kind of ordinary that feels safe, even sacred, when you're in it. Back then, my wife Lisa still laughed easily. She had that kind of laugh that made other people join in even when they didn't get the joke. I used to think it was her superpower, that lightness she carried into every room. She was charming, spontaneous, the kind of person who danced with the kids in the kitchen while flipping pancakes. I was the steady one, the one who made sure the bills were paid, the lunches were packed, the gas tank was full. We balanced each other. Or at least I thought we did. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when things began to shift. It wasn't one big fight or a dramatic silence. It was gradual, like a dimmer switch being turned down one notch at a time. At first, it was little things. She started checking her phone more often, smiling at texts she wouldn't explain. When I asked, she'd say it was her college friend, Jenna, or her mom. I believed her. I wanted to. Then there were the trips. She started driving out to her parents' place, 90 minutes away, a couple of times a week. They missed the kids, she said. And that made sense. Her parents adored our children. But 2-3 times a week? It didn't add up. I remember one night after she came home late, the kids were already asleep. She smelled like someone else's cologne. It wasn't strong, just faint, the kind of scent that clings to clothes when you've been too close to someone for too long. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "Sorry, traffic was awful." Then she went straight to the shower. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the clock on the microwave, listening to the water running upstairs. Every drip of the faucet sounded louder than it should have. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But something inside me had already started to splinter. Still, I told myself, she's tired. You're tired. Maybe this is just what marriage feels like after years of routine. We had 2 kids, part-time jobs, bills, and not enough hours in the day. People drift sometimes, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But then came the silences. The kind where you're sitting 2 feet apart on the couch, and it still feels like you're in different houses. I'd ask about her day and she'd shrug. I'd try to make plans and she'd say, "We'll see." Her laughter, that beautiful, effortless laugh, became rare, like a song you hadn't heard in years. I started to notice other things too. The way she'd angle her phone screen away when she typed. The quick change of subject whenever I walked into the room. One night, I heard her whispering on the phone after midnight. When I asked about it the next morning, she smiled like it was nothing and said she'd been talking to her mom about a family recipe. I nodded, but something inside me hardened. Because I knew her mother, and her mother never stayed up past 9. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes from sleeping next to someone who's already left you in every way that matters. You still hear them breathing. You still share a bed. But emotionally they're a ghost. Sometimes I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, and wonder when she'd stopped looking at me the same way. I tried to remember the last time she reached for my hand just because. I couldn't. She started staying out later, sometimes not getting home until after midnight. always with an excuse. Jenna needed to talk, or Mom wasn't feeling well. But I'd seen her mother just days before, cheerful as ever, chatting about garden tools. It wasn't that Lisa was cruel. That would have been easier, honestly. Cruelty is clear. You can fight it. What she gave me instead was distance, soft, polite, almost kind, but it was a wall all the same. And yet I kept trying. I took over more chores. I made dinners I knew she liked. I bought her flowers once, left them on the kitchen table before work. When I came home, they were gone, tossed out with the trash, stems sticking out of a black plastic bag. No note. No thank you. Just gone. That was the night I realized something fundamental had shifted. You can't fix something when the other person's already decided it's broken. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. We had kids, a home, a history. I told myself maybe she just needed space. Maybe this was temporary. But every time I said that, the house got quieter. The kids, though, they noticed. Kids always do, even when you think they don't. Emma started asking why Mommy was gone so much. Caleb began to cling to me more. One night, when I tucked him in, he said, "Mommy's always driving to Grandma's house. Why doesn't she take you too?" That hit me harder than I expected. Because what could I say? Mommy's just busy? Busy doing what? Busy being somewhere I wasn't allowed to go? It was around then that I started paying attention to the car's odometer. I'd fill up the tank and jot down the mileage. Nothing obvious, just small notes tucked away in my phone. Within a few weeks, I noticed the numbers didn't make sense. She was driving hundreds of extra miles every week. There was no logical reason for it. That's when denial stopped being an option. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. Something was happening. One night after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room surrounded by toys and half-finished laundry. The clock ticked loud enough to feel like a heartbeat. I thought about confronting her, about demanding the truth. But I already knew what she'd say. "You're overreacting. You're imagining things." So I waited, and I watched. The next morning, she left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I glanced over, not out of snooping, just habit, and that's when I saw it. A sticky note half stuck to the side of the keyboard, curling at the edge. Her handwriting, unmistakable. An AOL password. It was like fate handed me the key to every secret she'd been keeping. I remember staring at that little piece of paper, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself to walk away. I even stood up, turned toward the door. But curiosity and dread are a deadly combination. I sat back down. The computer hummed to life, the familiar AOL login screen blinking at me like a dare. My fingers trembled as I typed her username, then the password. When the inbox opened, I swear I felt the room tilt. Dozens of messages. Some from friends. Some from family. But a few, the ones she thought were private, were from him. At first, the emails were innocent enough. Then they weren't. Words that made my stomach twist. Plans. Memories. Jokes that weren't meant for me. And worse, her talking to her friend Jenna about him. About what they did. About his wife. In that moment, something in me went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace. The kind that comes from clarity. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't wake her up and demand answers. I just printed the emails. Folded them neatly. Put them in an envelope. And I started thinking. Because betrayal hurts, but knowing how to respond to it, that's power. And as I sat there in the glow of that old computer screen, surrounded by the wreckage of the life I thought I had, I decided one thing with absolute certainty. If she was going to lie to me, she'd regret ever thinking I wouldn't find the TR. I've heard people say that when you start suspecting your partner of something, the real battle isn't with them. It's with yourself. Because once that seed of doubt is planted, you start fighting every thought in your own head. Every instinct. Every whisper that says you already know the truth. After finding that sticky note with her AOL password, my world split into two versions. In one, I was a paranoid husband reading too much into things. In the other, I was a fool living in a lie. And every day I couldn't tell which one I hated more. The next week was torture. Lisa acted perfectly normal. She made breakfast, packed lunches, even kissed me goodbye before leaving for her parents' house. But every time she said it, I caught a flicker in her eyes, hesitation, like she was silently daring me to question it. I started noticing details. Gas receipts on the counter that didn't match the mileage she claimed. Coffee cups from places an hour away. A strand of hair that wasn't hers on the passenger seat. Tiny things that anyone else might have ignored, but when you're looking for the truth, every breadcrumb glows. The logical part of me said, "Mark, stop. This isn't you. You're not a jealous guy. You trust people." But another voice, the one that had gone quiet for years, whispered back, "Trust doesn't mean blindness." I tried to drown that voice out. I really did. But one night, when she left her laptop open again, it all came back. The sticky note. The password. That gnawing certainty that something inside our marriage had already died, and I was the only one who hadn't noticed the body yet. I sat there for almost an hour, staring at that glowing screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wasn't sure which would hurt more, confirming my fears or realizing I'd become the kind of man who needed to spy to feel safe. My parents had gone down this same road. I grew up in a house full of slammed doors, half-truths, and broken promises. I swore I'd never repeat that cycle. I told myself love was supposed to be different when you did it right. But sitting there that night, I finally admitted it. You can do everything right and still lose. I typed in her AOL username, then her password. The sound of the keys felt deafening in that quiet kitchen. The moment the screen loaded, I froze. Her inbox blinked to life, a digital diary of a life I didn't know she was living. I scrolled past messages from her mom, her friends, even one from the school about a field trip. Then I saw it. The name, Jenna, her college best friend. At first, the emails looked harmless. They were talking about weekend plans, gossiping, laughing about old memories. But then, the tone shifted. "Jenna, so are you still seeing him?" "Lisa, yeah. We met again yesterday. God, it's like being 19 again." "Jenna, isn't his wife suspicious?" "Lisa, she's too busy being miserable. He says she's let herself go." I stopped reading. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might shake the table. But I couldn't stop. I kept scrolling. Email after email. Lunches that weren't really lunches. Meetings that weren't with clients. And then I saw the worst part, her talking about me. "Lisa, Mark's still the same. Predictable. Kind. So damn careful about everything. I could cheat for a decade and he'd never notice. Jenna, doesn't he ever get suspicious?" "Lisa, nah. He's too good. Too boring. But hey, it makes sneaking around easy." That line hit harder than anything else. Too good. Like decency was a weakness. Like loyalty was something to laugh about. I felt my hands go numb. My ears started ringing. It was like every word on that screen was echoing inside my skull. I could see my reflection in the dark monitor, pale, hollow, barely breathing. For a moment, I thought about waking her up right then and there, shoving those words in her face, demanding answers. But then I saw the clock. 1:47 a.m. And something inside me shifted. I realized no amount of shouting would fix this. No confrontation would make her suddenly care about the damage she'd done. She'd already rewritten me in her story, turned me into some background character, a prop in her little fantasy. So instead of screaming, I started printing. Each email came out of the printer with a slow, mechanical sigh, one sheet after another sliding into the tray like death certificates for our marriage. I watched the stack grow taller, the pages curling at the edges as the ink dried. Every line of text was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought we shared. When the last page printed, I gathered them all, straightened the edges, and slid them into a manila envelope. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. I sat there for a long time, staring at that envelope. It looked harmless, ordinary. But inside it was everything: proof, betrayal, and the end of the person I used to be. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside her, listening to her breathing, soft, steady, untroubled. The same woman who'd looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me that morning. And that's when the guilt hit me. Not for what she'd done, but for what I was thinking of doing next. Because a part of me wanted revenge. The other part wanted peace. And I didn't know if I could have both. The next morning I made coffee, kissed the kids goodbye, and went to work like everything was fine. On the outside nothing had changed. But inside I was building a plan. Over the next few days I became an observer in my own life. I noticed how easily she lied, how casually she spun stories about her day, her parents, her lunch breaks. It wasn't even effort for her anymore. Lying had become her language. And as much as it hurt, that clarity gave me strength. I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Not anymore. One night, while tucking the kids in, Emma asked, "Daddy, are you sad?" I smiled. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" "Because you don't laugh as much. Kids always know. They see what we hide." I kissed her forehead and told her everything was okay. But inside, I made a promise: I'd protect them from this mess no matter what it took. The next morning, after dropping them off at school, I drove to a small diner across town. I ordered black coffee I didn't touch and stared out the window, replaying everything in my head. I thought about confronting Lisa's lover. I thought about calling his wife. I thought about smashing his car windows, about exposing them both in the most public, humiliating way possible. But then I remembered my parents. The shouting. The chaos. The way they'd torn each other apart until there was nothing left but resentment. I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to be another man who let rage control the ending of his story. So I told myself, I won't lose control like they did. I'll handle this my way. That vow became my anchor. It didn't numb the pain, but it gave it direction. For the next few weeks, I collected information quietly. Dates, times, receipts, lies. I wanted everything documented, not because I needed proof for myself anymore, but because I was preparing for something bigger. One afternoon, I stood by the window as she packed the kids into the car, saying she was taking them to her parents again. She smiled like nothing was wrong, kissed me on the cheek, and drove away. When her car disappeared down the street, I exhaled and said out loud, "Okay." That was the day I called my old friend Dave, a police officer I'd known since high school. I didn't tell him everything right away, just enough for him to understand. He listened quietly, then said, "I know a guy. Used to be on the force. Now he's a private investigator. He's discreet. He'll find what you need." That night, I dialed the number Dave gave me. The man who answered introduced himself as Ron. His voice was calm, professional, the kind that made you believe he'd seen everything already. We met the next day at a small coffee shop near the highway. He listened to my story without interrupting, took notes, and nodded slowly. Then he said, "You've already done half my job, Mark. I'll take it from here." I handed him the envelope, the printed emails, dates, and a few of her recent schedules. It felt like passing off the weight I'd been carrying for months. When he left, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the traffic blur by, and realized something strange. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt focused. The truth had gutted me, but it also set something free. For weeks, I'd been living in denial and limbo. Now, finally, the next chapter had begun. I wasn't sure how it would end. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Lisa had written the first half of this story in lies. I'd write the second half, in consequences. I met Ron on a gray Thursday morning, the kind of morning that sits heavy in your chest. The sky was the color of old metal, and every car that passed seemed to be moving in slow motion. I parked outside a diner off Route 17, the kind of place where you could vanish in a crowd of strangers eating pancakes. Ron was already there when I walked in. He sat in the corner booth, back to the wall, sipping black coffee like a man who didn't trust sugar. His face looked carved from stone, mid-50s, gray at the temples, eyes sharp but calm. He had that cop presence. Quiet, unreadable, the kind that made guilty men confess before he even spoke. When I introduced myself, he gave a small nod. No handshake, no small talk. Just a measured, steady look. "Your friend Dave said you needed some help," he said. "I do," I told him. "I need to know what my wife's been doing when she says she's visiting her parents." He listened as I explained everything, the lies, the emails, the pattern. He didn't flinch, didn't ask stupid questions. Just took notes in a worn leather pad. Then he leaned back and said, "All right, Mark. Give me 2 weeks. I'll find you your truth." His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was clinical, like a surgeon telling you he's about to cut. Those 2 weeks crawled by like years. Every day I went through the motions. Work, home, dinner, bedtime stories, all while pretending my life wasn't collapsing under its own weight. But when the house went quiet, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Ron somewhere out there with his camera, following her car, watching her walk into a world I wasn't part of. Sometimes I'd imagine her at that motel, laughing in someone else's arms, and my stomach would twist until I thought I'd be sick. Other times I'd feel nothing at all, just this hollow space inside me where love used to live. On the 12th day my phone buzzed. "Got something. Meet me tomorrow. Same place." I barely slept that night. When I walked into the diner the next morning, Ron was already waiting. Same booth. Same coffee. Only this time, there was a manila folder on the table between us. He slid it toward me without a word. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it because I already knew. Once I saw what was inside, I couldn't unsee it. Ron finally said, "Everything's in there. Dates, times, locations, photos. You were right." I took a deep breath and opened the folder. The first photo hit me like a punch to the ribs. Lisa's car parked outside a cheap roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and curtains that never close all the way. The next photo, her getting out of the car, smiling, dressed too nice for a visit to her parents. Then another, a man stepping out from a silver sedan, taller than me, tan, confident. He put his hand on her waist like he'd done it 1,000 times. She didn't pull away. Page after page, the story unfolded in brutal detail. Lunches that turned into hotel check-ins. Hours spent behind drawn blinds. Then her driving back to her parents' house to pick up the kids, her face calm, her lie perfected. There was no emotion in the report. Just timestamps, locations, and proof, cold, mechanical, undeniable. By the time I reached the last page, my hands were trembling. Not from shock, not even from heartbreak. From something colder. Ron cleared his throat. "You okay?" "Yeah, I lied." He studied me for a moment, then said, "I've seen this 100 times. Some people fall apart. Some people get angry. You look like a man who's about to make a list." I looked up at him, and for the first time in weeks I actually felt in control. "You said this guy's married?" He nodded. "Yep. Wife, 3 kids. Lives about 20 minutes from here." "What's his name?" Ron flipped through his notes. "Robert, but everyone calls him Bob." He gave a faint smirk. "I can get you everything on him. Address, employer, family ties, the works." I sat back, the gears in my head turning slowly. "Do it," I said. Ron didn't question me. He just scribbled something in his notepad and stood. "I'll be in touch." When he left, I stayed in that booth for another hour. The folder lay open on the table, the photos spread out like evidence at a crime scene. The waitress came by to refill my coffee, but I didn't even notice. There was no screaming, no crying, no throwing things. Just silence, heavy and absolute. That's when it hit me. Grief wasn't what I felt anymore. Grief was for the man I used to be. The one who believed in second chances and forgiveness. What I felt now was purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, my emotions lined up in perfect order, like chess pieces waiting for their move. I didn't want revenge out of rage. I wanted balance. I wanted justice. Because some betrayals don't deserve tears. They deserve consequences. Over the next few days, Ron sent updates. He texted me photos of Bob's house, a nice suburban place with a freshly cut lawn and a swing set in the yard. He sent me details about Bob's job, too, VP of sales at a company owned by his father-in-law. Figures. The kind of man who thought charm was the same as character. Every new piece of information fit neatly into place. By the time Ron was done, I didn't just know what Lisa and Bob had done. I knew who they were and what they stood to lose. One night, while sitting in my car outside the house, I opened the folder again. The photos fluttered in the evening breeze like ghosts of everything I'd loved. The motel sign in the background blinked weakly. Vacancy. 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 That word hit me harder than I expected. Vacancy. That's what my marriage had become, a hollow space filled with lies. I closed the folder and said it out loud just once to the empty car. Proof doesn't heal, I whispered, but it sharpens the blade. And from that moment on, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect. The next morning I called my lawyer. Not because I wanted to end things impulsively, but because I wanted it done right. Clean. Legal. Unavoidable. While my lawyer prepared the paperwork, Ron finished his final report. Printed copies, bound neatly, every page time-stamped and signed. When he handed me the stack, he said, "You're one of the calmest clients I've ever had." "I don't see the point of screaming," I told him. "That's what she expects." He gave me a small nod. "Then what comes next?" I looked down at the folder, at all the damage she'd done, and smiled for the first time in months. "What comes next," I said, "is the part where I stop reacting and start writing the ending." Ron didn't ask what that meant. He just extended his hand, and for the first time I shook it. When I walked out of that diner, the sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in weeks. The air felt lighter, sharper. I wasn't walking away from the wreckage anymore. I was walking toward something, not rage, not closure, but clarity. The kind that comes when you stop being the hunted and become the hunter. I sat in my lawyer's office like a man waiting for a train, not sure where it would take me, but knowing there was no turning back once it left the platform. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. Shelves lined with law books made everything feel serious, permanent. My lawyer, Claire, had that composed, efficient air people talk about when they say someone is good at their job. No theater. No moralizing. Just facts, options, timelines. "Thank you for coming in," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "Go ahead, tell me what you want to do and we'll make sure it's done right." I told her. Not the raw, splintered version with all the late-night fear and rage, but the clean, necessary parts. The email printouts, Ron's report, the dates. I handed the manila envelope across the desk like I was passing off a burden. She didn't react. She simply slid it open, leafed through the pages, nodded, and made a note. "We'll file for divorce," she said. "But this isn't only about separation. With this evidence, you can protect the kids, secure custody terms, and most importantly, make sure there's no funny business with assets or spousal support." Her voice was steady, clinical, almost soothing in its practicality. "You want this to be clean. You want it to hurt in the places that matter, legally, not theatrically." That last line landed exactly where I wanted it to. Hurt where it mattered. Not explosive scenes I'd later regret. Not the kind of drama my parents had gifted me in childhood. This would be surgical. Precise. Legal. We discussed timing. Claire recommended serving the papers at a time and place where it would be impossible to spin them into some diluted story about spontaneity or misunderstanding. Public. Controlled. Immediate. She asked about work schedules, about where Lisa spent her days, about whether she would have a lawyer or friends present. I answered with the details Ron and I had meticulously gathered. I told her about Bob, about the silver sedan, about the way he put his hand on Lisa's waist as if he owned the space. She raised an eyebrow when I mentioned his job, VP of sales at his father-in-law's company. That little piece of information changed the geometry of everything. A man whose livelihood and image depended on his in-laws was the kind of man who'd crumble spectacularly when those foundations were pulled away. You understand the leverage here, Claire said quietly. If his job and income are tied to his marriage, to his father-in-law's favor, exposing him could have exponential effects. That was the point. Not violence. Not humiliation for humiliation's sake. Structural collapse. The sort of fallout that would echo through the carefully arranged life he'd built. Back home I started living in two rhythms. There was the daily life, pancakes, school lunches, bedtime stories, the choreography that kept the kids sheltered from the storm. I made sure they had the version of me they needed, steady, predictable. And then there was the other life, the one observed through legal pads and calendar entries, filled with meetings with Claire, messages from Ron, and quiet calls to the bank to inquire about asset records. We ate dinner under an unremarkable light, the kids chattered about nothing, and I smiled at the right times. I was actor and playwright both. The more I practiced the normal, the more convincing I became. I wanted Lisa to think nothing had changed. I needed her not to see me coming. There's a peculiar power in pretending. It keeps people loose. It keeps them sloppy. When someone believes you're harmless, they stop bracing. They stop double-checking. They stop hiding the parts of themselves that would otherwise be kept in neat boxes. That complacency was my ally. Meanwhile, Ron kept feeding me pieces. Bob's social media feeds. A wedding album of staged smiles. Records showing him on the company payroll, living under the shadow of his in-laws. I learned where Bob's father-in-law kept the company accounts. I learned which bank he used. Small things, legal tender for the kind of disruption I planned. The plan was simple in its cruelty and elegant in its logic. Synchronize. Make the truth undeniable in both directions. Let the wife who had lied be legally and publicly unmoored, and let the husband who'd pretended to be a loving family man feel the consequences of that lie where it mattered most: work, home, and community. Don't scream the truth from rooftops. Hand it politely, professionally, to the people whose livelihoods could be undone by it. I spent an afternoon sharpening a pencil the way people sharpen knives in movies. Slow, careful, almost ceremonial. I marked a date on the wall calendar in the kitchen with a small, neat X. Judgment Day. Nothing melodramatic. No fireworks. Just a tiny cross that felt like the setting of a clock. I prepared the packets with the same meticulousness. For Lisa, divorce papers, copies of Ron's report, printouts of the emails, everything laid out in legal order with page numbers, signatures, and a cover letter from Claire explaining the facts and the immediate legal implications. For Bob's wife, a different packet. Not a tirade, not a spectacle. Just the plain evidence, presented respectfully, with an explanation of what Ron had found and a suggestion that she'd take immediate steps to protect herself and her children. For Bob's father-in-law, a letter with the proof of Bob's indiscretions, tied neatly to business facts showing Bob's position and his access. Each packet was a measured blow. Not cruel but effective. Evidence has a way of making people choose. It makes friends in suits confront the truth in boardrooms. It makes wives evaluate their bank accounts. It makes fathers look at their sons and decide what kind of man they want representing their family. Timing was the only art left. Claire drew up the paperwork with a serve-on date and time. Ron arranged to meet Bob's wife in a place where she would be alone and able to process the information privately. We chose the same morning. Lisa would be served at work at 9:30. Ron would knock on Bob's wife's door around the same time. The dominoes would fall together, no theatrics, just coordinated truth. I remember the small acts of ordinary life that week as if they were contrived scenes in a play. I folded laundry in the quiet of Sunday afternoon. I edited grocery receipts. I double-checked the custody provisions Claire recommended, deciding which clauses were non-negotiable and which could be left to negotiation. I rehearsed what I'd say to the kids if they asked questions. I practiced keeping emotion a flat line, present for them, absent for the drama. There was also fear, of course. Fear that I was being cold. Fear that the man I'd been would be replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But I kept the vow I'd made in the beginning. No theatrics like my parents. That meant no drunk midnight confrontations, no slammed doors echoing down the hallway, no shouting matches that would leave the kids scarred. It meant quiet. It meant law. It meant consequence. On Thursday, Claire called to confirm that the paperwork was ready and that the process server would be at Lisa's office on the date we'd chosen. "You ready for this?" she asked. I thought of the pencil, the X on the calendar, the way the kids laughed at dinner without a care. I thought of my parents and the broken lessons they'd passed on. I thought of the life I wanted for my children, a life free of that cycle. "Yes," I said and meant it. That night I sat up in bed long after Lisa had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above. The house was quiet in the way it always had been when the kids were away, but different now, charged. I felt no malice toward her, only a terrible, precise inevitability. She had chosen to rewrite her life in secret. I had chosen to rewrite the ending in public. When I left for work on the morning of the X, the sun was low and flat. The mail hadn't yet come. I placed the packets I'd prepared in the trunk of my car and closed it softly, as if I were closing the lid on something that needed to stay contained. As I drove, there was a strange lightness. Not relief, not joy. Just a clear line, the difference between chaos and order. I had taken something devastating and given it form. I had translated hurt into a method that would force consequences, not theatrics. Whatever happened next would be real. It would hurt. It would change lives. It would also be deserved. And in that strange clarity, I felt the calmest I had in months. The morning of Judgment Day began like any other, which is what made it perfect. No thunder, no cinematic storm clouds, no dramatic background music. Just sunlight spilling over the kitchen counter and the quiet hum of the coffee maker. I sat there, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the steam rise like a slow exhale. The thing about revenge, the real kind, the kind that changes lives, is that it doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be timed. The clock on the wall ticked toward 9:30. My pulse didn't quicken. My breathing didn't change. Everything that needed to be done was already in motion. I'd played my part weeks ago, every step choreographed, every letter folded, every copy made. Now I just had to watch. When the clock hit the half-hour mark, I took a slow sip of coffee and looked out the window. The world looked ordinary, unaware. Somewhere across town, Lisa was about to be handed an envelope that would split her life in two. At exactly 9:32, my phone buzzed, a message from Claire. "It's done." I could picture it as clearly as if I'd been there. Lisa sitting at her desk, surrounded by her co-workers in that sterile office space that always smelled faintly of toner and perfume. A man in a blue shirt walking in, asking for her by name. The moment when he handed her the envelope and her smile faltered. The sound of paper tearing. The quiet shifting of bodies when people around her realized what was happening. Divorce papers. Served at work. No shouting. No warning. Just reality arriving, signed and sealed. I imagined her face as she read the header, petition for dissolution of marriage. Her fingers trembling. Her lips parting, trying to form a question that no one could answer. The whispers starting. Her name on everyone's tongue, her dignity slipping through her hands like water. I didn't enjoy the image, but I didn't pity it either. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. Across town at that same hour, Ron was pulling up to a quiet suburban house with trimmed hedges and wind chimes that jingled in the morning breeze. Bob's house. He parked across the street, double-checked the folder in his passenger seat, and stepped out. When Bob's wife opened the door, she looked tired. The kind of tired you only get when you've been holding something together that's already falling apart. Ron introduced himself politely, handed her the envelope, and told her she might want to sit down before she opened it. She did. On the couch, in her robe, sunlight spilling over her shoulder as she slid the documents free. At first, confusion. Then stillness. Then the trembling started. She flipped page after page. Timestamps, photographs, printed emails, reports signed and dated. Her hand went to her mouth. The breath hitched in her throat. The words that followed were quiet at first. No. No, he wouldn't. Then anger broke through, sharp, guttural. She stood, dropped the papers onto the floor, and paced the room, muttering to herself, her disbelief curdling into fury. Ron waited in silence, giving her time to process the storm. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, her voice steady. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me." That was the moment everything began to fall apart. Not just for Lisa, but for Bob. The next 48 hours unfolded like dominoes tipping over one by one. Lisa came home that evening. Her makeup was smeared, eyes red and glassy. She didn't even knock. She just walked through the door like a ghost, her purse half open, the divorce papers clutched in her hand. "Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, can we talk about this? It's not what you think." I stayed calm. "Lisa," I said quietly, "I know exactly what it is." She started crying, not quiet, remorseful tears, but desperate, performative ones. The kind that sound like someone trying to convince themselves they still have control. "I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. We can fix this. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. You made choices," I said. "And this, all of this, is what those choices look like." She followed me through the kitchen, pleading, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't," I said softly. "Don't make this harder than it already is." When she realized there was no forgiveness waiting, no chance to spin her story, something in her broke. She dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The sound filled the house, raw, jagged, pitiful. But it wasn't my burden anymore. Meanwhile, Bob's world was imploding. By that evening, his wife had driven straight to her parents' house, the same parents who happened to be his employers. She showed her father the report, the photographs, the evidence. It didn't take long. Word spread through the company like wildfire. Employees whispered. Meetings were canceled. By the next morning, Bob was called into his father-in-law's office. That corner room with the glass wall and the big oak desk where deals were made and futures decided. The conversation was short, brutal. His father-in-law's voice was steady, measured. The voice of a man whose disappointment cuts deeper than anger. "You humiliated my daughter," he said. "You betrayed your family, and this company. You're done here, Bob." Security escorted him out before noon. His company car revoked. His phone deactivated. His keycard disabled. By evening, his wife had emptied their joint account and changed the locks. And as if fate wanted to make a point, the house they lived in, the perfect two-story home with the trimmed lawn and flower boxes, was owned by her parents. By Friday, he had nowhere to go. I didn't have to see it happen to know the sound it made, the slow, hollow collapse of a man who thought he was untouchable. Lisa called me again that weekend. She begged to meet. I agreed, mostly out of closure, maybe curiosity. We sat across from each other at a small cafe, the same one where we used to go for breakfast back when things were still innocent. She looked smaller somehow, her posture folded, her eyes puffy, her hands trembling around a cup she barely touched. "I never meant for it to go that far," she said. "It was supposed to be just attention. Something stupid. I thought I could control it." I let her talk. Every word was an echo of excuses I'd already read in her emails. Every sentence was a reminder that she wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. When she finally ran out of words, I leaned forward. "Lisa," I said quietly, "you didn't just cheat on me. You cheated on the life we built, the trust our kids believed in. You don't fix that with apologies." Her lips trembled. Tears welled up again. "Is there any chance?" I shook my head. "No. There's just truth now." That was the last real conversation we ever had. Over the next few months, the fallout settled like dust after an explosion. Lisa moved in with her parents. The divorce went through cleanly. No drama, no screaming, no late-night phone calls. The kids stayed with me most of the time, though I never poisoned them against her. They didn't need my words. They'd seen enough themselves to understand the shape of disappointment. As for Bob, his life never recovered. His wife filed for divorce within days. Court records showed he lost custody, his job, and eventually his home. There were police reports, domestic disputes, trespassing incidents, restraining orders. He spiraled. The last I heard, he left the state completely. No trace. No social media. Just gone. And that's when I realized, revenge doesn't always look like triumph. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. Sometimes it's just quiet. A kind of silence that settles over your life when justice has finally balanced the scales. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just felt finished. The coffee tasted the same. The mornings looked the same. But something inside me, the part that had once bent over backward to be understanding, patient, forgiving, was gone. Replaced by something colder, steadier. Because in the end she got what she wanted, freedom. And I got what I needed, peace. And maybe that's the only real revenge there is. It's been years now. The dust has long settled, and the noise of it all, the whispers, the pitying looks, the endless what-ifs, has faded into the background hum of an ordinary life. The kids are grown. My son just turned 24 and my daughter's finishing college next spring. They're good people, kind, grounded, sharp in ways that remind me that maybe, despite everything, I did something right. Lisa and I still cross paths at birthdays, graduations, the occasional family dinner. We're polite. A nod, a small smile, the shared understanding that comes from surviving the same storm. There's no venom left, just distance. The kind of space that isn't angry, just final. I don't ask about her life and she doesn't ask about mine. That boundary is sacred. We only talk about the kids, who needs help with rent, who's visiting for Thanksgiving, that sort of thing. And that's enough. My days look simple now, but simple is what I used to dream of. I spend my weekends fishing on a quiet lake a few miles north of town. It's the same lake my dad used to take me to when I was a boy. The mornings there are cold, still, and clean, just mist hovering over the water, the creak of the boat, and the slow rhythm of breathing. I sit there with my coffee thermos and a worn-out paperback, and for the first time in a long time, I feel content. I think back sometimes not out of anger but out of perspective. About how fast things can unravel when honesty disappears. About how one decision, a message, a lie, a secret, can split a family story in two. The truth is, I don't hate Lisa. Not anymore. Hatred is too heavy to carry for this long. What I feel is quieter, a kind of detached clarity. She made her choices and I made mine. I don't forgive her, but I don't wish her harm either. I just wish she'd understood what she had before it was gone. Every now and then, when the kids share updates about her, I catch glimpses of who she's become. She still lives near her parents, works part-time at a local clinic. She seems stable, maybe a little lonely. But that's her journey, not mine. What surprises me most, though, is hearing about Bob's ex-wife. Her name's Caroline. I learned through the grapevine, mostly from Ron, the PI who still sends me the occasional Christmas card, that she ended up running her father's company after he retired. Apparently she's thriving. She rebuilt her life from the ground up, raised her kids well, and even expanded the business beyond what her dad imagined. Just poetic, really. The woman who was betrayed rose higher than the man who thought he could live without consequence. That's karma at its cleanest, Quiet, patient, perfectly timed. Sometimes, late at night, I'll sit on my porch with a glass of whiskey and think about everything that's happened. Not with regret, but with acceptance. I used to think revenge was about watching someone else fall apart. But I've learned it's really about rebuilding yourself in the silence that follows. The healing didn't come quickly. It came in fragments, small victories, slow mornings, rediscovered laughter. The first time I made pancakes for the kids and didn't feel the ghost of her beside me. The first time I looked in the mirror and didn't see a man defined by what someone did to him, but by how he chose to respond. I won't pretend there weren't nights when the anger came back, when I replayed every lie, every email, every photo. But over time the memories lost their sharpness. They became just stories. Things that happened to a version of me that no longer exists. What stayed though was the lesson, that calm isn't weakness. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to let people face the consequences of their own actions, without lifting a finger, without a word, without letting them see you break. Now, when people ask me how I managed to stay so composed through it all, I tell them the truth. I wasn't calm because I didn't care. I was calm because I'd already decided what I was worth. I learned that peace isn't something someone gives you. It's something you take back once you stop fighting battles that don't deserve you. Lisa lost everything because she took me for granted. And I lost her because, for the first time in my life, I finally chose myself. In one single day, everything changed. Two families, both once picture perfect from the outside, shattered along the fault lines of truth. One built on lies finally collapsed, and one built on loyalty finally set itself free. She lost her comfort, her carefully curated image, the safety net she thought would always be there to catch her. The whispers at her office, the pity in her parents' eyes, they became the soundtrack to her new reality. He lost his job, his home, and the mask he'd worn for years, that smug confidence stripped away when the world saw who he really was. The man who once walked into motels with my wife now walked out of courtrooms with his head down. And me? I didn't lose anything that wasn't worth losing. The peace that came after wasn't loud or triumphant. It was steady, clean, almost sacred. Because the truth had done all the heavy lifting. I didn't need to scream or destroy or chase payback. I just needed patience. Time has a way of pulling masks off, of revealing who people truly are, and when it does, all you have to do is stand still and let it happen. In the end, justice didn't come from vengeance. It came from calm, from clarity, from the quiet power of finally walking away from everything that tried to break you, without looking back. You can't stop someone from betraying you, no matter how much love, trust, or time you give them. Some people will always choose their weakness over your loyalty. But what you can choose is who you become after it all falls apart. Rage burns fast. Dignity lasts. I learned that the hard way. The more I tried to hold on to anger, the more it kept me tied to her, to the pain, to the lies. But when I finally let it go, when I chose calm over chaos, everything changed. The moment I stopped fighting for her, and started standing for myself, that was the moment I truly won. Not because I destroyed her, but because I rebuilt me. And if you've ever been broken like that, remember, healing quietly is the loudest revenge you'll ever have. If this story hit you in the gut, if you've ever had to piece yourself back together after someone shattered your trust, then you know exactly how it feels to rise from the ashes without saying a word. Hit that like button and share your story in the comments, because your voice might be the one that helps someone else find their strength again. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories like this, tales where karma doesn't need help, and truth doesn't need vengeance, because truth is vengeance. Stick around. Every week we dive into real stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption. Some will make your blood boil, others might just heal a part of you that's still waiting for closure. Either way, you won't want to miss what comes next.